This lesson, a rather short lesson, is a little bit of a consolidation of some of the stuff we've talked about across a few lessons, just so you understand particularly how Nazis' policies to the Jews escalated between 1933 and 1939. A couple things. It's always important to remember that behind all of this, that the Nazis believed in the superiority of the Aryan race, and they persecuted members of other races. Not only the Jews, but they also persecuted any group that they thought was a threat to their ideas. However, the group singled out for the worst treatment, of course, was the Jews. The Jews had been discriminated against in Europe for centuries, and anti-Semitism certainly wasn't a new phenomenon in Germany. In fact, that could be said for most of Europe at that particular time. Hitler, of course, had grown up in Austria and not Germany, but had been exposed to all sorts of anti-Semitism in Austria, particularly Vienna, one of the most anti-Semitic cities in Europe. They had no fewer than 8 tabloid newspapers that promoted anti-Semitism. The mayor himself of Vienna, the infamous Karl Lueger, at the time of Hitler's life in Vienna, was one of the most rabid anti-Semites in all of Europe at that particular time. Now, there really is in Europe 2 particular reasons for the anti-Semitism. The first one is religious. The Jews had been blamed for centuries for the death of Jesus Christ. And then secondly, jealousy. The Jews tended to be a well-educated minority. Therefore, as a consequence of this minority held well-paying professional jobs or ran successful stores and businesses. And there was a strong element that the Jews had somehow, succeeded where others had failed, and that this minority had got one over on the majority. So there was a degree of jealousy throughout Europe at this time. Germany and Austria, for that matter, are not particularly exceptional in this respect. In terms of Hitler himself and his anti-Semitism, it's obviously, the most obvious statement, obviously, that Hitler hated the Jews immensely. In his early years in Vienna, he had become obsessed in large part with the fact that the Jews ran many of the successful businesses there, particularly the large department stores, which offended his ideas about the superiority of the Aryans. Hitler more particularly developed his anti-Semitism as a cause of the end of the First World War. He had blamed Jewish businessmen and bankers for Germany's defeat in World War I and thought that Germany had been undermined or stabbed in the back by these people, oftentimes referring to them as the November criminals, making particularly association to people like Walter Rathenau and Matthias Erzberger, Jewish members of the Weimar Republic. Who, in fact, had signed the Treaty of Versailles, and coincidentally both who were assassinated between 1922 and 1923. That said, they were immediately banned from the civil service the minute Hitler took power in 1933. Other public services, such as broadcasting and teaching, were also forbidden to the Jews. The SA and the SS troops in April 1933 will organize boycotts of Jewish shops and businesses and marked these out with the Star of David so they could be easily identified for boycott purposes. So this boycott only lasted a day or two, but it was really the first step in Hitler's anti-Semitism. The next major progression of his anti-Semitism needs to be seen as the Nuremberg Laws of 1935, delivered at the Nuremberg Party rally by Hitler himself. The Nuremberg Laws, in essence, took away German citizenship from the Jews. They were forbidden to marry or to have sex with pure-blooded Germans. Goebbels' propaganda really builds on this, and they start to bombard children and families with anti-Jewish messages on the back of the Nuremberg Laws. Jews were often refused jobs, and people in shops refused to serve people who were Jewish. In schools, Jewish children found themselves, after the Nuremberg Laws, humiliated and segregated because they had in effect been, as a consequence of the Nuremberg Laws, segregated in society, created a division that had been carved out where the Jews inhabit, and that wasn't necessarily in the mainstream of German society. The next step between 33 and 39 is, of course, the infamous pogrom of Kristallnacht. It happens in November 1938. It happens as a consequence, of course, and we've talked about this, of a young Jewish man, a man named Marius Vanderloo. Not Vanderloo. What's his name? Oh my gosh, I forgot. The guy's name, and you don't have to know this for your exam, was Herschel Greenspan, and he killed the Nazi diplomat Ernst von Rath in Paris in November of 1938. I'll tell you a little story on the side of this right now. Why not? Herschel Greenspan's family had actually been expelled from Germany with many Jews in 1938 and tried to return to Poland, the country of which their passport had held. There were lots of German immigrants from Poland, or rather Polish immigrants in Germany at the time working, and the Nazis decreed that any of these who happened to be Jewish needed to return back to Poland. Well, in 1938, the Poles wouldn't accept them back in, and they ended up living sort of in between the border of Germany and Poland. And as the winter came in, these people started to freeze to death and started to starve to death of hunger. And Greenspan's family found themselves on the Polish border. Enraged by what the Nazis had done, he vows to kill this diplomat and does. This actually is used by the Nazis as an excuse to launch a violent rampage against the Jews. The SS troops who carry out Kristallnacht are in plain clothes, meant to show that, it wasn't just the SS. This was a spontaneous uprising, even though it wasn't. And they were issued with pickaxes and hammers and given the names of Jewish shops and businesses. In total, in Kristallnacht, 91 Jews were murdered. Thousands of synagogues were burned down. 20,000 Jews were taken to concentration camps, and many more fled the country. Most Germans watched this event in absolute horror and alarm. There was lots of concern about what the Nazis were doing, but the Nazi press, of course, being completely controlled by Hitler and Goebbels, presented it as a spontaneous reaction of ordinary Germans against the Jews for the murder of Ernst von Rath. However, the majority of Germans didn't believe this. Nevertheless, and it's really important to point out that as the persecution of the Jews intensify in Germany, very few people protest. And in fact, the fact that very few people protest, especially when the Jews are being brutally murdered and the violence is increasing, allows or gives what's known as agency, the ability for Hitler and the Nazis to ever increase Nazi policies. And we'll look at in later lessons, in fact, the last lesson of the death study, exactly how that, let's say, tacit acceptance, even though a lot of Germans don't like what's happening to the Jews, of what they're doing to the Jews, how that acceptance will lead eventually to the final solution.